An ordinary girl stops to help a stranger unlock his car on a crowded street. She has no idea that with nothing more than a rusted coat hanger, she's about to open the door to a future neither of them could have imagined. A future that will alter the course of her own life and stir the heart of a man who thought he had nothing left to believe in when it came to love. If you've ever been hurt, you'll want to stay with this story. Autumn fell softly on the little town, like a breath exhaled at the end of a long day, thin and fleeting, like the curl of steam from a forgotten cup of coffee left on an old wooden shelf, untouched for years. The late sun slanted through crimson maple leaves, casting a glittering carpet of light across the sidewalk in front of a small bookshop called Maple's Corner. The dark wooden sign was weathered, its lettering worn nearly smooth, but the scent of old paper and cool autumn wind made the place feel warmer than any hearth. A sleek black BMW sat parked just outside, a discordant note in a setting that looked plucked from the pages of a novel. The car door slammed shut. The locks clicked automatically. A man stood there frowning, his eyes vacant as he stared at a phone that flashed 3% battery, less than the flicker of hope in his expression. He wore a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, a loosened tie, his dark brown hair tousled like he'd run his hands through it 100 times that day. There was something chiseled about his face, the kind of weathered structure that spoke of survival, but now seemed strained, as if bracing against something heavier than exhaustion. He pressed the power button again. The screen blinked, then went dark. His sigh dissolved into the hurried footsteps of passers-by. No one stopped. They thought, as people do, just another rich guy who locked himself out. Someone will come help eventually. Emma had just stepped out of the bookshop, a few worn novels cradled in her arms, wrapped loosely in yellowing newspaper. She paused as she passed him, just for a second. A hesitation. Her boots, scuffed at the toes, slowed on the pavement. She looked at the car, then at him, his expression lost, not angry or sad, but as though searching for someone in a crowd he couldn't quite see. Need some help? Emma's voice broke the air gently, like a single note in the last light. Of day. Ethan turned. He froze a moment when he saw her, a small woman with long brown hair tied back loosely, a bare face lit by the kind of quiet grace found only in the late hours of night. She handed him something, a slightly bent metal coat hanger. "I found it in my car. For popping the lock, if you know how," she said softly, asking no questions about why a man like him needed such a thing. He took it, then laughed, not a bitter or embarrassed laugh, but the kind that escapes when someone finally asks, after days of silence, "Do you need help? Thanks." "No one ever stops," he said. Emma nodded as if the exchange ended there. She didn't ask who he was, didn't wonder why a well-dressed man stood helpless beside an expensive car. She didn't judge or speculate. She simply saw someone who needed a hand and stepped forward. Within minutes, the door clicked open. Ethan was surprised by his own dexterity. When he turned to thank her again, Emma was already walking away. Her long knit dress floated gently behind her in the evening breeze. She disappeared behind a display shelf outside the bookstore. He saw her tilt her head as she opened the door, and then she was gone, swallowed by the shadows beneath the trees. Ethan stood still, the coat hanger still in his hand, the most valuable thing he'd received in months. Maybe because it wasn't just a tool to open a door, but the first key in a long time to something he'd thought was lost, a flicker of faith, as thin as a bent wire. He got into the car, but didn't start the engine. Through the crack in the window, the scent of old wood and silvered pages drifted in. He glanced at the rearview mirror, then back to where she'd stood. Cars passed, people moved on. Only he remained, with a faint light kindling in his chest, a hope so slight, so delicate, it might have gone unnoticed, if not for the way it made his eyes sting in the fading light. In a town where everyone hurried through their own stories, a man who once believed kindness was a luxury had just been reminded, by a girl with no name, no reason, no questions, that some things still endure. If only we stopped to see them. This story didn't begin with a crash of thunder or a sweeping romance. It began with silence and a glance. A moment so quiet, You might think it never happened at all. But Ethan remembers. And from that day on, he never forgot. Ethan sat in his car long after the door had been unlocked. The coat hanger rested in his palm, cold and weightless, like the moment itself, brief, unexpected, but oddly lingering. Outside, dusk had softened. Streetlights flickered on, casting golden halos as people hurried past, their shadows skimming the sidewalks. No one glanced at the sleek car parked in front of the old bookshop. No one noticed the man inside, holding a small, meaningless object that now felt as heavy as a new chapter, beginning to unfold. He leaned forward, resting his head against the steering wheel, eyes closed, calling up her face again. Not for her beauty, but for her gaze, free of judgment, and the voice that asked nothing in return. She hadn't been curious about his name. She hadn't hesitated in a crowd or shrunk from a stranger. She had simply seen someone in need, and that was enough. Ethan had once believed in goodwill. When he started his tech company from nothing, every handshake came with hope and ideals. But success arrived too quickly. The higher he climbed, the faster the world beneath him shifted. Love, he thought he'd found it, turned out to be a merger dressed in white lace. The woman he'd planned to marry quietly sold insider information to a competitor and disappeared the night before the wedding, leaving only a message: "You'll be fine. You have everything." But he didn't. What he had was an endless hollow and a heart that had learned no one ever stopped. A soft honk behind him pulled Ethan from his thoughts. He started the car, easing it into the narrow streets of a town he hadn't meant to linger in. He was only passing through for work, and yet something had made him pause. Something as small as a coat hanger. Not far away, in a room behind the town library, Emma sat carefully mending the spine of a children's book. Most of the kids had gone home. A few still lingered, curled into beanbags reading comics. The amber light from the ceiling cast long shadows across the wooden floor. She smiled as a little girl tiptoed up to borrow another book, gently smoothing the child's hair out of habit. But in her soft eyes was a distant note, like a sad chord that had no place in a happy song. Emma had learned how to smile after being hurt. She knew how to brew calming tea, recommend the right story, tell light jokes to ease the mood. But every night, alone in the small apartment above the old bakery she rented after leaving the city, one unanswered question stayed with her. Is kindness still worth it? She had once loved someone she thought would walk beside her to the end. A man who always said she was too good, until the day he left with only a note. You should learn to be less trusting. She hadn't felt anger, just cold, as if kindness itself had made her unworthy, like a relic from another time. Too slow, too soft, too real for the world that moved too fast and too falsely. A breath of autumn wind whispered against the window pane. Emma rose and drew the sheer curtain. Darkness settled over the quiet street. For a moment, the image of the stranger from earlier drifted back into her thoughts. There was something in his eyes, not the wear of success, not the trace of wealth, but a kind of loneliness she recognized, something that felt like her. She shook her head to chase the thought away. It was nothing, just another act of help, like she'd always done. No expectation, no need for thanks. Even if deep down, she wasn't sure how many more times she could offer kindness without fearing it would be mistaken for weakness. Elsewhere, Ethan turned into the modest hotel where he was staying. The room was plain, not luxurious, but it made him feel for once like a regular person, something he hadn't felt in a long while. He set the coat hanger on the desk beside his unopened laptop. Then he stood and looked at it for a long time, as if it were a reminder that somewhere in the world, someone had seen him without needing to know who he was. That night, in opposite corners of the same quiet town, two people thought of a small moment. A nod. A thank you. A glance that said nothing, but carried a breath too heavy to ignore. Neither knew if they would meet again, and neither knew that from that single instant, a thread had quietly begun to stitch two distant hearts together, not through a sudden love, but through something far rarer, a trust being quietly, carefully reborn, one breath at a time. Tuesday morning brought another shift in the wind. Golden maple leaves blanketed the front steps of Maple's Corner, rustling in a hush, as if autumn were trying to whisper something no one had yet learned how to hear. Emma was shelving a new batch of novels, tugging her earth-toned scarf closer to her neck. In her mind, the cataloguing list, the reading nook that needed tidying, and without invitation, the image of the man from the other day, the coat hanger, and that strange, haunting look in his eyes. She hadn't expected to see him again, but just before noon, the wind chime above the shop door tinkled, and when she looked up, he was there, still in rolled-up sleeves, still with that gentleman's smile, but something in his eyes this time was tentative. "Hi," he said, his voice low and steady, though almost too careful, as if trying to match the hush of a room lined with old paper and paused time. "I hope I'm not intruding." Emma set the book down. Her heart didn't flutter, just missed a single beat. She studied him more closely this time. The man standing before her wasn't just the stranger with the locked car. He had come back for another reason. "I'm staying in town for a few weeks, and I thought—" He paused, almost sheepish. "I thought I'd try to do something useful. I'd like to help out here, with shelving, cleaning, anything really." Emma raised an eyebrow. She wasn't used to strangers asking for work out of nowhere, especially not ones who drove BMWs and looked like they stepped off the pages of a lifestyle magazine. "Have you ever worked in a library?" she asked, not suspicious exactly. Bert guarded. Ethan shook his head, honest and unbothered. "No, but I love books, and I promise I won't break anything." She watched him for a few moments, brushing her hair behind her ear. From outside came the faint laughter of children playing in the park. She didn't know why she nodded, only that something in his eyes made her not want to close the door. "You can start by dusting that shelf over there, and—" She hesitated. "What's your name again?" "Ethan," he said. "Ethan Gray. Emma." She smiled, not offering her hand. "I think you already know." From that day forward, Ethan came in 3 times a week. He never mentioned his old job, never spoke of a life outside the town. He simply dusted the shelves, arranged books according to the faded color-coded chart Emma had scrawled years ago, and listened, really listened, as she chatted with children and elderly visitors alike. Emma kept her distance at first, but slowly she began to notice how Ethan moved through the world with a quiet kind of care. He wasn't good at sorting children's literature, but he could tell a little. Boy about the Little Prince in a way that made the child sit completely still for half an hour. He didn't know how to make a latte, but brewed peppermint tea just right, earning a soft nod of approval from her she hadn't meant to give. And every time he told a story about narrow streets in Florence, tiny bookshops in Rome, or a gruff, old bookbinder in Vienna, Emma found herself watching him a little longer. Not for the stories themselves, but for the way he told them. Gently, deliberately, like someone mending a torn tapestry one thread at a time, using only memories and grace. One rainy afternoon, the shop sat quiet. Emma was tidying up a stack of old magazines when she saw Ethan in the corner, reading To Kill a Mockingbird. The golden lamp beside him cast a warm glow across his shoulders. The room was so still, she could hear the soft rustle of a page turning. "How many times?" "Have you read that?" she asked, walking over. He looked up, half smiling. "Maybe 8. Each time feels different, like I'm reading it in a new place, with a different heart." Emma sat on the long bench, resting her head against the window pane, gazing out at the thin curtain of rain. "I've always thought, if someone reads a book more than 3 times, they're probably searching for something real life never gave them." Ethan said nothing. He closed the book softly, eyes following the raindrops outside. "Did you ever find it?" he asked. She nodded, then shook her head. "I found it. I just couldn't keep it." For the first time, the silence between them didn't feel uncertain. It felt like a pause in music, natural, needed. Ethan set the book down. "Maybe some things we're not meant to keep. Maybe they were only ever meant to touch us and leave," he said, his voice soft as wind threading through a cracked window. Emma turned to him, eyes holding his a little longer than usual. She didn't know when it had happened, but she realized she felt safe when he was near, not because he always said the right things, but because he never tried too hard to be anything more than who he was. And when she smiled, a faint smile, barely more than a whisper, Ethan felt something loosen in his chest, something he hadn't known he'd locked away. No one had named what was forming between them. No declarations, no sudden confessions. But in the hush of the rain and the steady hum of lamplight, something honest was beginning to take root, like a seedling growing quietly beneath the soil, needing no promise, only warmth and the patience to wait. Autumn rain fell in a whisper, scattering fine droplets across the roof of Maple's corner. Yellow leaves drifted down the worn wooden steps, mingling with the hush of falling rain to form a slow, sorrowful rhythm, like time itself had hesitated. Caught in the quiet space between two hearts relearning how to trust, Emma stood behind the counter, dabbing gently at a teacup with a soft wool cloth. She knew Ethan would come. He always did, always on time, always with a smile that was never performative but still somehow made her breath catch. Since the day she learned the truth, she hadn't slept, but the next morning he'd returned, said nothing, offered no explanation, just quietly resumed stacking books, as if waiting for her to decide what came next. It was she, because her heart hadn't fully closed, who finally broke the silence. "Are you planning to stay in town long?" she asked one afternoon as they dusted the shelves in the vintage fiction section. Ethan turned to her with a small, sad smile. "If you don't ask me to leave, I'll stay." The words tightened something in her chest. She didn't know if she could believe him, but she knew she wanted him near. The days that followed passed in gentle quiet. Ethan told her about his childhood in a coastal town, how he'd once sold newspapers and saved every coin to buy his first novel. Emma spoke of her mother, who taught her to read and insisted that kindness was never wasted. They avoided the recent past, no talk of CEOs or betrayals or boardroom lives, only two people standing side by side among the hushed aisles where everything felt like it could begin again. One Saturday afternoon, with the sky clear and the breeze soft, Ethan invited Emma for a walk. They didn't go far, just through the small park behind the library. She moved slowly, fingertips grazing the low branches of nearly bare trees. He walked beside her, eyes drawn to her face with a reverence he didn't try to hide. When she paused beneath a towering oak, he looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said quietly. "Of all the places I've been, of all the people I've met, you're the first who didn't ask how much I made or what I used to do." Emma met his gaze, her eyes glassy with feeling. "Because that never mattered," she whispered. "I care about who's standing in front of me. Right now." A breeze stirred the leaves. Ethan reached out, his fingers brushing hers. She didn't pull away. A gentle stillness opened between them, wordless, real. Two people stepping into each other's lives, unprepared but no longer resisting. That evening, when they said goodnight at her gate, Ethan leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. She stood there long after he disappeared. Behind the hedge, her heart full and trembling. Something was growing between them, tender, new. But there was also something unnamed, something holding her back, quietly asking her to be careful. And then it unraveled. So suddenly, it didn't feel real. Monday morning, Emma arrived early to open the shop. A parcel was waiting on the step, new titles from their regular distributor. She unpacked them with practiced ease, checking off invoices. Among the books, a slim envelope from a publisher caught her eye. Inside was an invitation to a symposium, The Power of Tech and Compassion, featuring keynote speaker Ethan Gray, founder of Gray Tech and the Light Mind Foundation. She read his name 3 times. The photo was unmistakable. Ethan, not just a CEO, a global figure of inspiration. Her heart clenched, not because he was famous, but because he had hidden all of it. She had thought she was beginning to know him, the man who shelved books every afternoon, who brewed her tea, who held her hand under the golden glow of dusk. But now she saw herself as a side character in someone else's masquerade. When Ethan walked in around noon. The air in the shop had changed. Emma didn't smile, didn't greet him. She simply placed the letter on the counter. He looked down, saw the picture, saw his name, and saw the fracture in her eyes. "Emma," he began. "What were you going to say?" Her voice trembled. "That it's just another part of you I didn't need to know. That you came here to play at being someone else before slipping away again." Ethan stood frozen, words caught in his throat. "I'm not angry that you're a CEO," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm angry because you made me believe you'd chosen to stay, that this wasn't just another place to hide." He stepped forward, reaching for her hand, but this time she pulled back. "You had the chance to be honest, but you didn't take it." A tear slid down her cheek. It didn't fall with drama, it simply fell as the rain had that first day they met. She turned away. The shop bell chimed behind her like a door closing. Ethan didn't follow. He couldn't. He stood there in the space that had once been a sanctuary, now ruptured by the very thing he'd thought would protect her. Silence. And in that silence, she had been hurt most of all. Autumn had begun to slip quietly into winter. The wind turned colder, and the maple trees lining the front of Maple's Corner stood nearly bare, their branches like quiet questions against the pale sky. Emma still opened the shop each morning, still brewed peppermint tea, still sorted books and welcomed the children who came to read. But everyone noticed. Her smile had changed, softer, thinner, like a gauzy curtain drawn across a winter window, not enough to stop the wind, only to suggest that someone once tried. Since that day, Ethan had vanished. No messages, no explanations, not a single trace. Emma hadn't asked, hadn't searched. She withdrew into her quiet world, where everything had a place, like the shelves around her, trust filed beside disappointment, and unnamed feelings tucked in with what could never be. What she didn't know was, he never left. Just 2 blocks from the bookshop, Ethan had rented a small room above a bakery. He no longer drove the BMW, no more tailored suits. Just a man who sat each morning by the window, watching the little library across the street. The place where a woman once made him believe he might begin again. He had tried to write her a letter, deleted it, tried again, then stopped. He understood. Sometimes words weren't enough. Sometimes the truest things had to be shown quietly, without hope of forgiveness, only so the other person might know, "I'm still here." So Ethan began to plan. He contacted an old publishing partner using a different name, arranged the donation of several hundred children's books, some new, some gently loved. He packed each box himself, sending them to the town library under the name the Light Page Fund. No return address, no signature. Only a handwritten note for the children who've never had the chance to hold a book, and for those who once believed a single story could change a day. 3 weeks later, the free reading day began at the library, where Emma still came every week to lead story hours. That morning, she stepped into the reading room and froze. Dozens of children sat in near silence, holding books still fragrant with fresh paper. A long table in the center of the room overflowed with storybooks, fairy tales, science adventures, and coming-of-age novels. All of them stamped, "A gift, not for sale." Emma turned to the elderly librarian, her voice disbelieving. "Did someone donate all these?" The woman simply smiled and handed her a card. Emma read the handwritten line. Her fingers trembled. "For gentle hearts that deserve kind stories." That day, Ethan sat behind a folding screen near the window, wrapped in a grey sweater and scarf, hidden behind the tall shelves. He didn't come in, just watched. Emma sat with the children, reading Charlotte's Web, her voice steady as she told the story of a pig and a spider and the strange, enduring miracle of friendship. Each time she lowered her head and smiled, Ethan felt his chest pull tight. Each time her voice paused, he found himself holding his breath. No one knew who he was. No one saw his tears, only he knew that for the first time in weeks he saw her smile again. Not for him, not because of him, but for the children gathered around her. And somehow that was enough to keep him still. When the session ended, The children ran through the aisles, clutching their books like treasure. Emma lingered beside the table, her hand resting on the stack that remained. She didn't know who had sent them, but her heart whispered a name. She didn't say it aloud, didn't let herself believe, but she couldn't deny it either. Evening. Light crept across the library floor. Long shadows spilled down the front steps. Ethan rose and crossed the windy street. No one noticed him. No one stopped him. He turned into the narrow alley behind the bookstore, the one from which he could still see the reading room window in the distance. And before he left, he looked back one last time. Emma was still standing there, her hand resting on the first book he'd sent. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't crying either. She just nodded, just once, very slightly. As if to acknowledge something that had arrived even if it hadn't been named. Ethan turned away, heart aching, not because she didn't know who had sent them, but because maybe she did. And still, she didn't come. But he understood. Today wasn't meant to reclaim anything. Today was just about giving, like the day she'd handed him a bent coat hanger, only this time he didn't wait for the door to open. A week after the free reading day, the library buzzed like never before. Children poured in, wide-eyed and eager, as though they'd stumbled upon a secret treasure hidden in the heart of the town. The books, stamped "A gift, not for sale," remained in their honored corner, and each time Emma passed them, something stirred in her chest, an unnamed echo, like a familiar melody rising suddenly in the hush of an ordinary afternoon. No one claimed credit. But Emma knew, or rather, she felt. It was Ethan he hadn't returned, not directly, but once she glimpsed a silhouette across the street. Another time she found a small folded slip of paper tucked inside the velveteen rabbit. It held just one line. "You once believed in what no one else could see. I know that." She held the note in her hand for a long time. No tears, no smile, just a quiet tightening in her chest. On Wednesday afternoon, Emma agreed to lead a story session at the children's shelter at the far end of town, recently partnered with the library for rotating reading programs. The space was humbler than the library, the ceiling low, the paint peeling in patches, but the air inside was full of light. The children beamed when they saw the new books. As Emma stepped in, the room had already formed a circle. In the center sat a man, hunched gently forward, reading "Where the Wild Things Are" to a little girl curled in his lap. His voice was low, even, careful. One hand rested softly on the book's spine, his eyes following the lines as though the entire world had narrowed to the page before him. Emma froze. She knew that posture, that voice, the way his shoulder dipped when he leaned in. Ethan, he hadn't seen her. He kept reading, his voice as calm and tender as it had been on quiet afternoons in Maple's Corner. The little girl smiled now and then, her tiny fingers gripping the edge of his sweater, the very one Emma had helped him pick out at the market weeks ago. Emma stood motionless in the doorway, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. The rest of the room faded into silence. Only his voice remained, unpolished, unperformed, the voice of someone who truly loved children and stories and small things. And somewhere in the deepest part of her heart, she took half a step back, as if her body could no longer hold steady. Then she turned quickly and slipped out into the small courtyard behind the center, alone, head bowed, and for the first time in weeks she cried, not from betrayal, not from deception, but because she knew he had never changed. Ethan, not the CEO, not the face in the glossy magazine, but the man who once fumbled with a coat hanger, who dusted the old shelves, who told the little prince to a quiet little boy with nothing but a look. And now, here he was, reading to a child without needing to be thanked, without needing to be forgiven, only needing to be near. Emma wiped her eyes, breathing deeply to steady herself. The breeze tugged at her hair, sharp with evening cold, but inside her something warm had begun to settle. Not sunlight, something deeper. The realization that to love someone wasn't about who they had been, but who they chose to become when no one was watching. Inside, as Ethan lifted his gaze between pages, a movement near the door caught his eye. Just a glimpse, but enough to make his heart twist. Emma, she was gone now. But for the briefest moment their eyes had met, and he had seen no anger, no blame, only tears. And then she had turned away. Ethan didn't follow. He knew. This time he wouldn't chase, because if she returned it would be by choice, not out of pity, not out of longing, but because her heart had seen him, truly seen him. So he stayed. Sat with the child resting quietly against his chest, the book still open, the story not yet finished, and a hope that asked for nothing, only to remain. Evening came. A golden leaf drifted past the window, and in the hush that followed, something bloomed quietly in Emma's heart. Not forgiveness, not the return of an old love, but a truth. Ethan had never left. Dusk settled over the town like an old winter quilt, soft, threadbare, and heavy with silence. The sky hung low in a pale grey hush, the kind that made even the trees seem to breathe more slowly. Wind moved through the narrow streets, not with bite, but with something gentler, an ache, a reminder that time doesn't wait even when pain hasn't finished letting go. Emma walked slowly along the stone path that led toward the town park. In her hand she clutched a piece of paper, the note he had once left inside a book. You once believed in what no one else could see. I know that. From the moment she saw him reading to that orphaned girl, she had known her heart had never turned away. But it took another week, one more week of quiet reckoning, for her to find the courage to face something harder than memory, that forgiveness wasn't forgetting. It was choosing what was worth keeping. And she knew if she didn't speak now, they would stay lost inside the silence that had once held them so close. She walked to where he lived, a small room above the bakery, where the same warm light glowed each night, steady and solitary. She didn't ask for directions, didn't call his name. She just followed the pull in her chest until she stopped on the quiet corner where the wind softened slightly, and saw him there, leaning on the wooden railing, holding a cup of coffee still steaming in the cold. Ethan looked up. His eyes met hers, surprised then still. He didn't speak, didn't smile, as if he couldn't believe she was real standing here. Emma stopped in front of him, close enough to hear his breath mix with the hush of evening. You didn't tell me, she began, not with anger, only with the gentle gravity of truth. Not because you wanted to deceive me. I know that. A breeze lifted her hair. Ethan said nothing, didn't move. His eyes held no defense now, no plea, only the quiet fatigue of someone who'd carried something too long alone. You were afraid, she continued, that I wouldn't believe in the real you, that I wouldn't believe in your reason for staying. He gave the smallest nod, an admission too fragile for words. But you were wrong, she whispered. I saw you, not in the news, not in the library, but when you bent down and read to a child, asking nothing in return. A long silence passed between them. Then, for the first time, Ethan spoke. I'm not good with explanations, he said, voice hoarse. But every day with you I tried not to ruin something, because I was afraid it wouldn't feel real anymore if you knew who I used to be. Emma reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and closed her fingers. Around his... The grip was unsure, not steady, but it was everything he had hoped for. Her hand warm and brave. We've both been hurt, she said, eyes shining with something that looked like mourning. But I believe, from today we can try to heal, together. Ethan tightened his hold on her hand and, for the first time in a very long while, allowed himself to breathe, as if the armor he had worn for years had slipped away gently all at once. He didn't ask if she loved him. He didn't promise never to hurt her. They didn't need promises, just presence, just standing here as they were, in a space where nothing was hidden anymore, like slipping out of an old winter coat and leaving it behind in the hall. Behind them the streetlight blinked on. A child ran past, clutching a picture book. Ethan had once donated. He glanced at the two of them holding hands, smiled briefly, and kept running, perhaps already understanding that some stories don't end with a kiss, and some loves begin with the courage to believe, just once. More. 1 year later, The air still carried the same crispness as that afternoon long ago. Maple leaves tumbled across the wooden steps in slow spirals, as if time itself had chosen to move more gently. But today, the place was no longer Maple's corner. A new wooden sign hung above the vintage glass door, deep brown with soft, elegant lettering, Maple and Light Foundation, and just below, a smaller line, barely more than a whisper for those willing to pause and listen. A small act of kindness one can open an entire new life. Inside, the scent of old wood and paper lingered, familiar as ever, but the light was warmer now, brighter. Low shelves filled with children's books lined the walls. A round table, splashed in cheerful colors, was ringed by small chairs. Hundreds of stories lived here now. Fairy tales, science adventures, even handmade books penned by the very children who had once sat cross-legged on the floor, learning that stories could belong to them too. Emma sat at the center of it all, reading aloud. Her voice drifted like wind across a sleeve, her gaze soft as early mist. In front of her, more than 20 children sat in a wide circle, wide-eyed and leaning forward as if her words might lift them somewhere new. She smiled, turned the page, and in that moment, no one would have guessed she had once been someone afraid to trust again. Ethan stood near the back. He didn't step forward, didn't need to. He adjusted a few handmade drawings on the wall, children's artwork selected to be featured that month. Each of his movements was quiet but grounded, like someone who had finally discovered where he was meant to stand, not because of title, but because of love. When the story ended in a burst of applause, the children rushed to the book table, eagerly choosing the next tale to bring home. Emma rose and her eyes met Ethan's across the room. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Just a small nod. A quiet smile. Not bright, but true. Later, Emma stepped onto the front porch,